Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been a fantastic debate this afternoon with moving contributions from all sides. But I have to say, what's been quite perplexing, given the government announced this funding settlement with such fanfare and as if it was such good news, that we've only had 5 members from the opposite ventures speaking on behalf of it, and all of them with, and I quote from the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness, with mixed feelings. All of them reference the government's failure to revise the funding formula as a cause for concern for their own force areas. The Honourable Member for Nuneaton described it as not a long-term approach. The Honourable Member for South Dorset said that without more government funding, that we will continue to lose officers, which is unacceptable to both him and to his constituents. And all of them said it was not a sustainable way forward to keep on asking for more council tax. These are hardly ringing endorsements from those sitting behind the Home Secretary tonight, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yet, on the other hand, we've had impassioned speeches from these benches on exactly why we will be voting against this completely inadequate settlement tonight, because, as my honourable friend for Knowsley said, cuts have consequences. He and the honourable member for Garston and Halewood, both Merseyside MPs, spoke about losing 1,000 officers and 200 PCSOs, which undoubtedly have had an impact on rising crime. My honourable friend from Hartlepool spoke about the shocking documentary which showed that only 10 police officers were available for that entire town on a given night, which felt like it was an open advert to criminals and left local people feeling under threat and much less likely to report crime. My honourable friend from Norwich South spoke about the consequences of his force's decision to abolish all PCSOs, leading to the inevitable downgrading of staff and creeping privatisation as we're seeing people on zero-hour contracts covering crime scenes. My honourable friends from Birmingham, Edgbaston and Hull West spoke about fewer people reporting crimes at all and reported violent crimes not being recorded, despite what the Home Secretary said earlier, that increasing crime is a result of better recording, and that the very legitimacy of policing is at threat as people lose faith in the police. My honourable friend from Newport East spoke about the loss of thousands of officers and staff in Wales, cushioned only by the intervention of the Welsh Labour government, who, faced with the same budgetary choices of this government, have recognised the importance of community policing. And my honourable friend from Redcar speaking on behalf of Cleveland Police Force, which shows the clear inequality and the lack of needs-based resourcing, as she said, for the 4th highest crime rate in the country, yet receiving the lowest rise out of this settlement. As she said, this is a completely regressive settlement that fails her constituents and the constituents of many in this House. My honourable friend from Battersea spoke about the loss of community policing, not just those lost officers embedded in communities, but the crucial intelligence gathering and, even more crucially, the trust in the police that community policing brings. My honourable friend from Birmingham, Selly Oak, described a horrific litany of violent offences in the West Midlands and the horrendous inability of West Midlands Police to respond to 999 calls, all exacerbated because this settlement and all previous settlements delivered less to West Midlands than the vast majority of other forces. And the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton is absolutely right. The vote in front of us tonight is on the Home Office grant, which equates to a real terms cut. That is why we will be voting against it tonight, and we're pleased to see the Lib Dems in the lobby with us. The Honourable Member for North Durham spoke about the wider demand on the police from wider austerity, in particular mental health, as did my honourable friend from Batley and Spen, who described a huge rise in all types of crime, yet the settlement she is being asked to vote for could hardly be less adequate for the challenges faced in West Yorkshire, not least from child sexual exploitation. My honourable friends from Ilford North and Birmingham Erdington, steadfast supporters and consistent campaigners for the police, spoke of the prevalence of violent crime and burglaries in their constituencies left less safe by this government. And my honourable friend from High Peak spoke movingly of the impact on officers of the job we ask them to do day in, day out, despite cutting them and their pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no precedent in post-war history for a government to have undermined the police in the way that this government have. Never since records began has police recorded violent crime been as high as it is today. Never has knife crime been as high as it is today. Arrests have halved in a decade. Unsolved Unsolved crimes stand at over 2 million cases, and 93% of domestic violence offences go unprosecuted. This is the shameful legacy of this government, and they remain the only people in this country that continue to deny the link between violent crime and falling officer numbers. Today's settlement has to stand in that context, and in the context of 8 consecutive years of real terms reductions in central government funding. It is hardly something to boast about that this is the biggest rise since 2010, when this government have cut the police every year since 2010. So it's staggering that for the 9th consecutive year we are being asked to vote for another reduction in central government funding. 161 million in the central government grants and the pension grant combined do not meet the additional £311 million costs this year of government-imposed changes to pension contributions. This means not only in real terms but in cash terms, 31 out of the 43 forces will lose this year. In real terms, almost every single police force will lose. Barry Coppinger, the PCC in Cleveland, one of the poorest funded police forces in the country, estimates he is going to see his real terms funding fall by 2.1 million as a result of this settlement. So when the policing minister promised the House during the settlements that, quote, every police and crime commissioner will have their government grant funding protected in real terms, did he somehow inadvertently mislead this House? As my honourable friends have said, this government are giving with one hand and taking with another. Yep. But we shouldn't be surprised because they have form. Since 2015, they have promised to protect police funding, and yet we've seen police numbers fall by 5,900. The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to police funding, you cannot believe a word they say. Right. And who is paying the price for these Tory failures to fund the police? This settlement asks hard-pressed local taxpayers to bear that burden once again. Using council tax to pay for increased funding for the police is perverse and unfair. It fails to meet need and it fails to meet demand, especially alongside the continued failure to reform the funding formula and continued cuts to the Home Office grant. Merseyside will raise almost the same as rural North Yorkshire, despite having double the population and triple the violent crime. West Yorkshire have double the population and 4 times the violent crime of Surrey, yet we'll be able to raise about the same amount of funding in this year. What exactly was the point in the police minister going from force to force to assess demand if he then fails to produce a funding settlement for forces that matches that demand? Nobody, as my honourable friends have said, could think an appropriate way to assess how much a police force needs is how big the houses are in that area. How can the minister justify a postcode lottery that means the communities that are already seeing higher crime will receive so much less funding? This government have an abominable record on law and order and no political will to redress it. By passing the burden of their political failure onto local taxpayers, they are storing up problems for the future, which will see those forces with the largest increase in crime, especially violent crime, hit time and again. The public know this government has failed and will continue to fail in its first and most solemn duty to keep its citizens safe, and today's settlement confirms that failure once again. Yeah.